So I think that most people would agree with me when I say that no matter how enjoyable something might be, there may still come a point where one would feel burnt out or might want to take a breather. Personally, WoW has been a game that I like to relax with by, for example, having a podcast or a YouTube video running on the side while I just sort of do some mindless farming or gold making and whatnot. And so in today's video, I'd like to share some ways that you can viably make gold without even having to pay that much attention to the game at all, and in some cases even be able to leave the game on sort of semi-AFK by just pressing a few buttons and yet still be able to make good amounts of gold in Dragonflight. So with that, the first semi-AFK gold making method I want to briefly cover is a fishing trick that actually has already existed before Dragonflight, but has greatly been improved since this expansion. And the general concept behind this is that you can actually fish with just keybinds and thus don't have to actually pay attention to what's on your screen even, except for like the fishing sound effect, which you can turn off everything else in terms of the sound and just turn on your sound effects to be able to hear that. And while obviously you can multitask while watching a video or movie or whatnot. And besides setting up your in-game volume the way you want, let's take a quick step back and go over some of the other things you'll want to set up, starting with your fishing location. Personally, I prefer some of the Iskar and Tuskar fishing holes because I'll get to do the daily quests for some Iskar and Tuskar rep, which I do want and need for the additional fishing perks, as well as my recipes and other things that I can lock through the faction. But if you don't need the renown from this faction, and by the way, the daily quests here are super quick and easy, and you also get to, as a bonus, fill up and collect your fish that you collect passively from these fishing nets that you can set up at these fishing holes. But anyway, you don't necessarily have to pick this fishing spot. You can go for any other place that you prefer. For example, if you have like Blava fishing unlocked, you can go for something like that. And some other things you don't want to miss is to pick up and equip a fishing rod. There are Dragonflight versions that are better than the older ones from previous expansions. And also, very importantly, you want to also pick up an oversized bobber to make your bobber a lot larger so that you can actually make this strategy work just without having to move your mouse. By the way, these can be picked up cheaply from the region-wide auction house, or you can buy them from your capital city fishing supplier as well. And next up, you also want to go into your game options to turn on some specific functions, namely the interact key. So here you can actually select, if you go to controls, select enable interact key, which will allow you to bind any key you want to interact, which means or includes picking up fish. And also you can obviously have another keybind for casting your fishing line, right, as before. But now in Dragonflight, you can also bind a separate interact key, which will allow you to reel up or fish up the fish after you hear that sound effect, right? And the other thing you want to turn on is auto loot, which means you don't have to actually, click on the loot or hold whatever, shift or whatever keybind you have to pick up all the loot. If you have auto loot enabled from your settings, it'll just automatically pick everything up for you after you've used the interact key to fish up the fish. And with that, once you have whatever you want to multitask with, whether it be your phone, Netflix, YouTube, whatever, even another game, you're pretty much ready to go. Simply zoom in, and I recommend zooming in your camera. Obviously, you want to apply your oversized bobber first. It lasts for 30 minutes, so you won't have to be interrupted to reapply this, frequently. But either way, you basically zoom in, put your cursor near the middle, so that usually when you cast out your fishing line, the bobber will land within or on top of your cursor. And I found that even if it's not exactly on your cursor, the interact key can still sometimes pick up the fish, even if the cursor is a little bit off. So that's another perk of having the interact key. It makes the range of where you can click a little larger, which means it's a bit harder to misclick even compared to before. So basically here, you can just keep casting your line. Use your first hotkey to throw out your fishing line. Second hotkey after you hear the sound effect or see the bobble. Reel up the fish, you auto loot the fish, and then pretty much just rinse and repeat as you see fit without having to touch your mouse at all. And next up, and this one is pretty straightforward and yet can be extremely profitable, especially if you're okay with paying a little bit more attention to your game. And this is doing the various hyperspawn locations, especially in Dragonflight. There are actually a few that are really good, and these can generally be done solo, especially if you're a tank or more geared up, but can definitely be done in a group as well, especially if you want to optimize it, right? However, you will probably have to pay a little bit more attention if you're doing group pulls, so it kind of depends on how AFK you want to be, so to speak. And this first hyperspawn location I want to feature is right between the Azure Span and Onaran Plains by the, or on, I should say, the Gorlak Coast, where you can kill these Gorlaks who mainly drop a lot of cloth and greens and whatnot. And another location that I especially like is right here. It's also in the Onaran Plains, where you'll be killing these air elementals, which also have a chance of dropping rousing air. And as you know, a lot of the rousing elements, and if you combine them, the awakened elements can be worth quite a bit and are extremely important for professions in Dragonflight. So this can be a way to earn some consistent gold. It's right here on the southeastern corner of the Onaran Plains, right above Fork River Crossing. And what I particularly like about these hyper spawns is that you don't actually really have to move your character as the mobs sort of come to you, right? And not only that, they also hyper spawn, as in they actually respawn really quickly, and there are a lot of mobs that keep coming, right? Almost endlessly. And by the way, whether or not you're doing any of these specifically hyper spawn locations, there are other really good farms that you can do as well in a group, and it's also going to be really easy to find a group, right? Although for some of these farms you will have to move around a bit more, but your job might be so easy that it can be considered somewhat mindless as well. For example, the Obsidian Citadel farms, and especially the Cobalt Assembly is another popular one that can get you a lot of gold in a very efficient manner. And finally, last but not least, a very powerful and also semi-AFK way to make gold with professions is with shuffling. And there are multiple ways to do this. For example, in my previous video, I covered 2 such methods, one of which being utilizing Dark Moon cards or extracting them for awakened elements or rousing elements, and I'll link to my previous video if you want more details on that. But this is a pretty straightforward method. Basically, you need to spec into any of the elemental card types to be able to unlock this ability to extract the Dark Moon cards. And yet another shuffle that I featured last time was with tailoring, where you can spec into textiles to unlock the spinning tree, and once you max that out, you'll be able to also extract rousing elements from unraveling different types of cloth. So you can just go into the auction house, buy up the cloth, and then just keep unraveling them, provided that the cost of the wilder cloth is actually going to be less than the expected amount of rousing elements that you're going to be able to sell. And as for finding out whether either of these shuffles is going to be profitable at that moment, I'll link to my previous video which will go over just that and how you can do so very easily. Now for yet another shuffle that I want to feature, and one that I've been doing more extensively recently, is pretty simple actually, and it's with inscription. Basically by speccing into inscription, the basic tree or the generalist tree, and also maxing out my milling as well as my ink production nodes, I'm able to mill not only herbs more efficiently but also create inks more efficiently, and then also use that ink to make other stuff, right? And by having multiple layers of efficiency and bonus stats like multi-craft, and by the way, I actually swap out different profession tools depending on the secondary stat that I need. So for example, when you're milling, you don't actually get multi-craft. There's not that stat for milling, so I would actually swap to resourcefulness to max out the basically gold margin that I can get. And then once I switch to creating inks and other reagents, I'll actually swap over to multi-craft to get a larger benefit from that, right? And by the way, when you multi-craft, you can actually get like a multi-proc. So it's not just like a ×2 proc, right? You can actually proc multiple items, more than 2 or however many the base amount is. You can actually multiply that, similar to how alchemist transmutations were with transmutation mastery back in the day. And how you can really maximize the AFK-ness, so to speak, or like how passive your shuffling is by buying in bulk, right? And just crafting in bulk, which has become more viable in Dragonflight thanks to, the ability to mass mill with your new profession interface and things like that, right? And also reagents stacking to 1,000, that helps as well. So if you're pretty sure that something will be profitable, which it generally is, even if you're breaking even pretty much with the prices, as long as you have enough secondary stats like multi-craft, resourcefulness, especially if you spec into the right trees, right? And by the way, these trees can be pretty easily set up even with a new or fresh level 60 character, because you don't really have to go into the bind on pickup, stuff like the gear, right? Which, by the way, crafting motors have kind of sucked, so I don't really recommend that unless you really have people that you can, customers, right, that you can craft for. But anyway, I digress, right? It's pretty easy to set up a character for shuffling purposes, so you can set up like a scribe plus a tailor just for that purpose. Or if you want to do like enchanting on top of that, you can also do other types of shuffle and synergize, right, throughout the entire process by having multiple middlemen for different types of reagents be your own characters. But even just on my scribe, I can actually take this shuffle even further past the inks, right? By creating these chilled runes, for example, which are then used for other crafts too that I do sell. But for example, even just the chilled runes, for instance, especially since I have some multi-craft here and even some inspiration and resourcefulness, once I get a proc to rank 3 of the chilled rune, or if I get some reagents saved, I actually like to sell my rank 3s, and then my rank 2s are kind of break even without any procs. But anytime I get any sort of proc, whether it be resourcefulness or multi-craft, or sometimes I even get inspired multi-crafts, anytime any of these procs happen, I'm sort of turning a profit, right? And thus when I have a large volume crafting lots of chilled runes, many of these procs will indeed happen. So that's definitely like pure profit just from those procs. And whereas if I don't make this like a shuffling thing, or if I don't mass craft, there's a lower chance of any proc happening, right? For example, you just craft one chilling rune and you don't get any procs, you're kind of just breaking even, and in some cases you might be losing slightly in terms of your gold. But over time, if you do a lot of these, you should benefit and make profits, especially if you spec properly in your profession trees. And a couple of last tips I want to share is that, first of all, you can actually enchant your profession tools, although from the clips I'm showing here I haven't done so yet. So especially for long-term crafting and mass crafting, enchanting, even if they cost a little bit right now, will usually pay itself off if you do lots of crafts, right? And besides that, there are also the sagacious incenses. There are lots of different instances, but they're not really used for crafting. They're used for like mounts and stuff. But anyway, the sagacious incense provides inspiration. So if you're running any sort of inspiration build for any of your crafting or mass crafting or whatever, say enchants is one that people popularly use inspiration builds for, you can definitely consider using these instances, which by the way last for 10 to 20 to 30 minutes depending on rank, and allow you to really do shuffling for, or mass craft even for long periods of time while benefiting from them fully. And lastly, if you want to do super mass bulk crafting, the aerated file of quick hands from alchemy can also be helpful, because it actually speeds up your crafting and can be relatively inexpensive to buy from the auction house. For example, the rank 3 right now is 150 gold and lasts for 30 minutes, which actually speeds up your crafting speed by 30%. And that's pretty much all I want to cover in today's video. And by the way, for me, WoW has been, especially recently, a game that I like to chill with, not having to put too much effort or thought into the game compared to before, where I also like to have videos on the side that I enjoy while just chilling within the game. And also going semi-afk is something that I appreciate because of that, right? And also making gold for my WoW tokens and whatnot. So hopefully you found this video helpful, and if you have anything else to add, be sure to comment down below and I will definitely answer them to the best of my ability. And with that, thank you so much for watching, and I will catch you in the next video. Peace.